Dr. D, and on behalf of all of the biology instructors at JCC, I want to welcome you to Bio 111, the first course of a two-part series of general biology. These two courses are part of the articulation agreement between the community colleges and the four-year state institutions in North Carolina. If you plan to transfer to a public four-year university in the state system, your general biology requirement will have been met upon your successful completion of Bio 111 and 112. One of the requirements for the lab component of Bio 111 is to learn to write for the curriculum, or in other words, learning scientific writing. You're going to be required to complete a minimum of 3 lab reports based on labs that you do in class. The labs involved will be assigned by your instructor. Scientific writing may be very different than anything you've ever had to write in the past. Unlike some other papers that you may be asked to write for other classes, scientific writing is not meant to entertain. It is meant to convey information to other scientists in a very straightforward way, following a very specific format. Also, it's written in third-person past tense. Personal words like I, we, or our, or present tense words like is and are, do not belong anywhere in the paper. Instead, you write as if you had been a fly on the wall during the process of the experiment. You write as if you were personally not involved at all. For example, in first person, you would write, we measured exactly 5 milliliters of alcohol into a graduated cylinder. But in third person, it would be changed to read, exactly 5 milliliters of alcohol was measured into a graduated cylinder. Can you see the difference? Both are written in past tense, which is correct, but one writer was personally involved and the other was not. The first example is first person. The second example is third person, the correct way. We're going to break the entire format down into sections to help you write your lab reports and get the highest grade you possibly can. The first thing you're going to write is your title. It should be brief, but it should clearly describe the experiment. It doesn't have to be catchy, because remember, you're not writing to entertain, you're just conveying information. Take a look at the titles in your lab manual. They are nice and short, but in most cases they are too short or too broad. For example, Lab 13 in your lab manual is titled Natural Selection. Well, that's pretty broad. That doesn't really tell us much about the experiment either. A better title might be Demonstrating the Founder and Bottleneck Effects of Natural Selection. That provides a little more information. You want to convey as much information as possible in a short statement. You're best to try to keep it under 10 words or so. The next section of the lab report is the abstract, but that gets written after you've written everything else. So we're going to come back to that. After the abstract is the introduction. The introduction provides a lot of background information. It includes other published material on the subject that the reader needs to know in order to understand your paper. You're going to state what's already known on the subject in your own words. But anything that was previously known has to be referenced and cited properly. This is known as your literature review. For example, you may want to state that osmosis is the diffusion of water through a semi-permeable membrane. Well, that is true, but it has to be cited. You could use your textbook, your lab manual, or even a journal article that states that, or you could even use all 3. In scientific writing, we cite within the body of the text using APA style, with the author's last name and the year the article was published in parentheses. The full citation will go at the end of the lab report in your references section. We'll talk more about that when we get to that point. Let's look at a few examples from scholarly journal articles. If there's only one author, His or her last name is written in parentheses, followed by a comma, and the year of the publication. If there are two authors, both get cited within the text in the same manner. But if there are more than two authors, you cite the first author only, followed by the Latin words et al., which means and others, and then the year. Notice where the period goes at the end of the sentence. It goes after the citation, not before. So how do you know whether something has to be cited or not? The rule of thumb is, if it is not a discovery made by you, it needs to be cited. You learned it from somewhere, and you have to give credit to that source. Basically, every statement of fact in the introduction needs a citation. For this course, you should have a minimum of 5 outside sources cited within the introduction. A real scientific paper would have many more. Your instructor may have a higher or lower requirement. That is up to them. The information that should be included in your introduction are the background, which we've already mentioned, your rationale, or the reason why you're doing the experiment. In other words, what were you trying to learn? And your hypothesis. What did you think would happen before conducting the experiment, not after you knew the outcome? A well-written introduction will have all of this information and the necessary literature review. The materials and methods section comes next, immediately after the introduction. It needs to provide all the necessary information that another scientist would need if he or she were trying to repeat your experiment. Be very precise. Tell exactly what needs to be done to repeat the experiment the way that you did it. You want to be very careful in this section not to plagiarize your lab manual by copying from it. Again, you need to write everything in your own words and in paragraph format. Stay in third person past tense. One of the steps of the procedure may have been to weigh a block of wood. You might be tempted to write, "We weighed the block of wood on a triple beam balance." But instead, you should write, "The block of wood was weighed on a triple beam balance." Let's look at a sample material and methods section from an article published online in Biology Open. You don't need to understand what's being said in the article, but you can see the amount of detail given by the authors and the fact that everything remains third person past tense, and it's written in paragraph form. When your instructor reads and ultimately grades your report, they will be looking for thoroughness as well. Could your experiment be repeated exactly the way you did it based on what you wrote? Is it in your own words? If the answer to these questions are yes, you will receive a high score on this section. The next section of a scientific lab report is the results, sometimes referred to as the data. It will consist of the results of your experiment written in both paragraph form and in figures, graphs, and/or tables. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this section. So at this point, you've finished up all the work and you're looking at what you've found. This is where you try to convey what you've found to your reader in the clearest possible way. Depending on the data, you're going to want to visually display what you found. We're going to have a pretend experiment to look at different ways to display information. Let's say we've conducted an experiment on the effect of different types of fertilizer on pea plants. Here's our raw data. We could show the raw data in table format, but the reader has to really look at everything to decipher which fertilizer was best. Would it be wrong to do this? No, not really, but this is definitely not the best way to display your results. Look at the labeling of the table at the top as well. We'll come back to that in a moment, but let's look at another possible way to display the same data. This is a bar graph of the same raw data. Visually, it tells a better story, but is it the best way to show the data to the reader? Not really. This is still pretty busy. Let's try averaging each type of fertilizer treatment and just show the averages. This is much easier to interpret. I, as the reader, can look at the data and tell right off the bat that the 16-16-16 ratio and the 12-7-7 ratios are much better than the control with no fertilizer and the 5-5-5 treatment. So if I were writing the paper, I would want to be as clear as possible, so I would use the last graph. Now, let's talk about how to label them. A table is anything that looks like it was prepared on a spreadsheet. My first raw data was a table. Sometimes tables are actually the best way to depict your data. It just depends on the type of data itself. But the table needs a label and an explanation. Tables are labeled on the top. If it's the very first table you're displaying in your paper, it is Table 1. That gets written in bold. After that, you write a detailed caption about what the table is about in normal text. I've written a proper caption for our fertilizer table. Notice that the table stands alone. You can read the label and caption and know exactly what the table means. You don't have to read the entire body of text to know how to interpret the table. Anything that is not a table is called a figure. These include pictures, graphs, and charts. In our case, we found a bar graph to be the best way to depict our information. Figures, like tables, need a label and a caption, but they are labeled below the figure. If it is the very first figure in the paper, it is Figure 1. Even if you already have a Table 1, this would be Figure 1. They are independent of each other. As was the caption in the table, the caption of the figure stands alone. You don't need to read the entire body of text to understand the figure. I can read the caption and tell exactly what it's all about. But there's more to the results section than just tables and figures. You also have to write your results out in paragraph form. Every single table and figure needs to be addressed by number in the order in which it was shown in the results. Let's look at another article published online in Biology Open that talks about the stings of honeybees and paper wasps. You don't need to read the article, but I just want to point out how the results are in both figure form and paragraph form. The author has recalled every figure in the article by number and talks about it in the results section. What you don't do is interpret the results. That's for the discussion section. In our make-believe fertilizer experiment, the paragraph portion might mention that the tallest plants were a result of a ratio of 12% nitrogen, 7% phosphorus, and 7% potassium by volume, but you would not interpret what that means. That brings us to the discussion section, which comes next. The discussion section is where you interpret what your results mean. Are there any important trends that the data suggests? You can refer to the tables or figures by number again here if you need to. Revisit your hypothesis, the one that you wrote before the experiment. You wrote about it in the introduction. Was your hypothesis supported or refuted? Remember, you can never prove a hypothesis is correct. You can only support it. However, if you were wrong, you can disprove it. You'll learn more about this when you study the scientific method. Let's look at our imaginary fertilizer study one more time. How would we include this material in our discussion? We see that we had the best results with the 12-7-7 ratio. This might suggest that the 16-16-16 had too much nitrogen. Or It might suggest that the nitrogen level was sufficient once it hit the level of 12%, and that the phosphorus and potassium was too high, having a negative effect on growth. You could mention that further study of pea plant growth could be done by holding the nitrogen content steady and then manipulating only the phosphorus and potassium in order to find out. What else does the data suggest to you? Sometimes staring at your raw data can cause all kinds of suggestions to pop into your head. That's why this section is called discussion. You discuss what it means. Show that you thoroughly understand your own results and what they mean. Once you have finished your discussion, you're now ready for your references to be listed. Remember, although you may be very proficient in the MLA style of citations, you have to format your lab report using APA style. APA stands for the American Psychological Association. All scientific papers are written this way, no matter where you are in the world, and it's very different from MLA. So you're probably going to need to get some help with it. We have free clinics in our writing center that can help you, and there's also a free website called Purdue OWL that can help you format APA correctly. There are also some software packages and websites that will automatically format it for you, like EndNote and EasyBib, but they charge a fee. Purdue OWL and our writing center are free. I like free. All right, now we have everything in front of us to write the abstract. It goes in first in the paper, and it's the last thing you write. And if you're really writing for a scientific audience, it's the most important thing you write. Why? Because in a lot of cases, it's the only part of your paper that will get read. Remember that you're not writing for entertainment. You're writing to convey science. The abstract is a concise summary or synopsis of everything you've learned. It tells the purpose of the experiment, gives an overall summary of the data that is presented in the paper, and it has your major conclusions, all between only 100 to 200 words. Sound impossible? It's not really, but that's why you want to wait and write it last. You will have analyzed the data and come up with the conclusions, and it will be a lot easier to write if you wait. Let's look at a well-written and easy-to-understand abstract written by one of your peers. The purpose of this lab was to understand how natural selection and genetic drift affect the genotypes of the overall population. In the lab, natural selection was tested in two ways. The first way it was tested was when all those with a recessive trait did not reproduce and began to die off, taking the trait with it for the most part. The second test was to see how natural selection adapts to two different populations with the same traits, but no contact with each other. The results of the first test showed how natural selection works and that the traits that are not deemed important will become less desirable and fade out of existence. The results of the second test showed that when those with the less desirable trait do not die off, heterozygous becomes the most popular genotype. This test also dealt with the founder effect and how two populations with no contact can become vastly different. So, is it all there? She's got the overall summary, the purpose, what was done, and the conclusion of each experiment, and all within 161 words. Also, the abstract is the exception to the rule. You do not put any citations within it. The citations will go within the body of the paper. For some of you, these 3 scientific papers may be the only 3 you will ever write. Others, this may be the start of many papers. You will just get better and better at writing them. Practice makes perfect. But there's one thing that may cause you to lose all kinds of points, and it's very preventable. Please use your grammar and spell check. A red squiggly line means you need to check the spelling. You may be using scientific words that your computer doesn't recognize, so look carefully. A green squiggly line means your grammar is incorrect. As an instructor, I can't tell you how frustrating it is to grade papers that are full of grammar and spelling errors. So please, for your sake and for your instructor's sake, when you think you're all done, please remember spell check and grammar check. That's it. That's how to write a scientific paper. I know this is a lot of information all at once, so for that reason, a link to this video will be available to you on Blackboard, along with the grading rubric for each of your lab reports. But as always, your best resource is your instructor. If you're not sure about something, just ask. We all want each and every one of you to succeed. And enjoy Bio 111. Have a great semester.